Think about a river for a second. It's always flowing, always different water passing through, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, try and think. Is anything in your own life really fundamentally unchanging? It's kind of surprising when you stop to consider it.
That's a really good way to frame it, because things often seem solid, but they're constantly moving underneath.
Exactly.
And that's what we're diving into today, this whole idea of how culture is always in motion, like that river, and whether there's actually a direction to all this human history stuff.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We're looking at how cultures, which maybe we think of as sort of fixed things, are actually constantly shifting.
Right, driven by stuff happening outside,
Mhm.
but also, and this is key,
Yeah.
by things inside the culture itself.
Internal contradictions, that's a big one we'll cover. And this like long-term move towards unity, a single global system.
Sort of, yeah, and how these big universal ideas started popping up. It's quite a journey.
And the idea is if we can kind of grasp these huge historical forces, maybe the chaos of today makes a little more sense.
That's the hope. Give you a new lens, maybe understand why societies change, if there's a pattern. Hopefully, a few aha moments along the way.
Okay, so let's dig into that first bit, culture always changing. The old view was that cultures were just static, harmonious.
Yeah, kind of like these perfectly balanced, self-contained bubbles. People used to talk about Samoan culture or Tasmanian culture as if they'd always been exactly the same.
Right, as if change only happened if something from the outside, like a drought or another group showing up, forced it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Left alone, the thinking went, they just stay the same.
But we know better now, right? I mean, every culture has its, typical beliefs and ways of doing things.
Sure, it's signature features.
But they're always evolving. Yes, environment matters, contact matters, but change also bubbles up from within.
Precisely. And that's where the idea internal contradictions comes in. See, human social orders, unlike, say, the laws of physics,
Which are pretty consistent.
right? Human rules, values, myths, they're often full of inconsistencies. And trying to sort out these clashes, that's what drives a lot of cultural change. It's like an engine.
Okay, give us an example. Medieval Europe.
Perfect example. You've got Christianity, right?
Very.
Emphasizing meekness, humility, turning the other cheek, rejecting worldly stuff.
Love thy neighbor.
But then you have the code of chivalry, all about honor, glory, proving your worth in battle, defending your reputation fiercely.
Yeah. Those don't really sound like they fit together smoothly.
Not at all. Picture a nobleman. Morning, he's in church hearing about storing up treasures in heaven. Afternoon, he's at a feast bragging about his battlefield exploits or planning his next duel.
So, like, total cognitive dissonance right there in his daily life.
Absolutely, a fundamental clash of values. But here's the interesting part. They didn't just throw up their hands. Trying to reconcile this, that fueled amazing cultural developments.
Like what?
Well, think about the Crusades. What better way for a knight to show both his piety and his fighting skills? Kill infidels for Christ. Sort of squared the circle, you know?
Okay, a justification.
And things like the military orders, the Templars, the Hospitallers. Their whole raison d'etre was to blend being a monk and being a warrior.
Ah, okay. Institutionalizing the contradiction.
Exactly. And even art and literature. Think King Arthur, this quest for the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
It's often about these knights trying to be both valiant warriors and good Christians, wrestling with that tension.
Okay, I see how that internal conflict wasn't just a problem, it actually created stuff.
Right. Now fast forward. Modern politics. Since the French Revolution, arguably, we've been wrestling with a different core contradiction.
Which is?
Equality versus individual freedom. Liberty, equality, fraternity. But how do you truly maximize all three at once?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. If everyone's perfectly equal, does that mean limiting someone's freedom to get ahead?
Or, flip side, if everyone has total freedom, won't that inevitably lead to big inequalities?
Definitely. So politics since then has been kind of navigating that tension.
A huge part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Look at 19th century liberal Europe, often prioritized freedom, laissez-faire economics.
Which Dickens wrote about led to pretty brutal poverty for some.
Exactly. Then you look at 20th century communist states. They prioritized equality, at least in theory.
But as Solzhenitsyn showed, often crushed individual freedoms to achieve it, or try to achieve it.
Right, and it's still the dynamic today, isn't it? Look at these. Democrats often push for more equality, maybe through taxes, social programs.
Which can feel like limiting individual freedom to spend your own money how you want.
While Republicans tend to emphasize individual freedom, less regulation, lower taxes.
Even if that leads to a bigger wealth gap, maybe a weaker social safety net.
It's the same fundamental tension playing out.
Yeah.
And the point isn't that one side is right. It's that this unresolvable contradiction is a source of dynamism. It forces debate, change, new ideas.
So these contradictions aren't bugs, they're features. They make culture lively.
That's the argument. It forces us to think, to reevaluate. Complete harmony might actually mean stagnation. A culture without arguments might be a dead culture.
Which brings us back to cognitive dissonance. Holding contradictory ideas. It's not just a psych quirk. It's essential for culture itself.
Absolutely vital.
Yeah.
If we couldn't hold conflicting beliefs simultaneously, like loving peace but admiring soldiers, or wanting equality but also wanting to be richer than our neighbor,
Yeah.
complex societies probably couldn't function.
So understanding a culture isn't about finding its perfectly consistent rulebook.
No. It's often about finding its catch-22s. Where do the values clash? Where are the hypocrisies? That's where the interesting stuff is happening. That's the engine room.
Okay, so cultures change, driven partly by these internal engines. But
Yeah.
is it all just random churning, or is history actually going somewhere? Is there an arrow?
Well, if you zoom way, way out, like look at millennia, not just centuries.
Yeah.
The argument is yes, there seems to be a direction towards unity, towards fewer, larger, more complex human societies. Think about it. Thousands of years ago, tiny scattered bands. Now, huge interconnected civilizations. The number of truly separate human worlds has drastically decreased.
But what about empires collapsing, like the Roman Empire splitting or the Mongol Empire breaking up or languages diverging? Doesn't that go the other way?
It does, on a smaller time scale. Those are like eddies in the river, temporary reversals or fragmentations. But the argument is the overall long-term current is towards coalescence, towards merging.
Like taking a view from a cosmic spy satellite, seeing the big, big picture.
Give that metaphor. From up there, the collapses look like temporary dips on a generally upward trend towards interconnection.
Okay, how can we really grasp the shrinking number of separate worlds?
A great way is to try and count them throughout history. Take Tasmania. After the last ice age, around 10,000 BC, the sea levels rose and cut it off from Australia.
Right.
For the next 12,000 years, the few thousand people living there had zero contact with any other humans on Earth. None.
12,000 years. Wow.
They had their own history, their own wars, their own discoveries, completely isolated. To someone in Egypt or China, Tasmania didn't just not exist. It was literally inconceivable, an entirely separate human world.
And that level of isolation was common back then.
Much more common. Think about the Americas before Columbus, totally separate from Afro-Eurasia for millennia.
So events happening in one place had absolutely no connection to the other.
Precisely. The example given is AD 378. The Roman Emperor Valens gets defeated by the Goths at Adrianople, a huge deal in Roman history. In that same year, way across the world, the Mayan king of Tikal, Choctaw Ichak, is defeated and likely killed by forces from Teotihuacan.
Two major events in two major civilizations.
Completely unrelated. No one in Rome knew about Tikal. No one in Tikal knew about Rome. They were in different universes, effectively. Two separate human worlds.
Okay, so let's try putting numbers on it. 10,000 BC.
Probably thousands of these little separate worlds. Hunter-gatherer bands, early farming villages.
2000 BC, with early states and cities.
Still hundreds, maybe a few thousand. Think Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus Valley, China. But also many smaller, more isolated groups.
Then jump to around AD 1450, just before the big European voyages.
Big change. By then, maybe 90% of all humans lived within one giant interconnected megaworld, Afro-Asia.
90%. So Europe, Africa, most of Asia, they were already linked.
Significantly linked, yeah. Through trade, empires, religion, spread of technology. It wasn't uniform, obviously, but there were definite connections.
Yeah.
A disease starting in China could reach Europe. Ideas could travel.
Okay, so one giant world holding 90% of people. What about the other 10%?
They were mostly in 4 other distinct zones. The Mesoamerican world, Aztecs, Maya remnants, etc. The Andean world, Incas. The Australian world, Aboriginal Australians. And the Oceanic world, Polynesians, Melanesians, Micronesians scattered across the Pacific.
Plus a few tiny outliers like Tasmania.
Exactly. So maybe 5 major worlds plus some isolates around 1450.
And then the Great Swallowing.
Yeah.
Over the next few centuries, that Afro-Asian world basically absorbed all the others.
Conquest, mostly, and colonization. 1521, Cortez takes down the Aztec Empire, Mesoamerica absorbed. 1532, Pizarro defeats the Incas, Andean world absorbed. Magellan crosses the Pacific, starting the process for the Oceanic world. Europeans arrive in Australia from 1606. Colonization ramps up from 1788. Tasmania annexed by the British in 1803.
Wow, it happened pretty fast, historically speaking.
Relatively, yes. And it was irreversible. There was no going back to separate worlds.
And today, we live in the result, a single global system.
Pretty much. We have a shared geopolitical framework, nation-states recognized by the UN, a dominant economic system, capitalism, global markets, shared legal ideas, human rights, international law, even if often violated, and a shared scientific understanding.
Even though a New York banker and an Afghan shepherd live vastly different lives.
They are still connected within this global system. Money flows between them. Political decisions in one capital affect the other. They might even argue using concepts derived from the same pool of international ideas or fight with weapons based on the same scientific principles.
So a clash of civilizations isn't really possible anymore. Not in the old sense.
Not in the sense of two sides being totally incomprehensible to each other. When Iran and the U.S. argue, they argue about nuclear physics, which they both understand, international law, national sovereignty. These are shared concepts within the global system. They're not operating in separate realities.
That really changes how you think about conflict. It also hits this idea of authentic culture, doesn't it?
It demolishes it, really. If authentic means untouched by outside influence, purely homegrown, well, good luck finding that anywhere today.
Every culture has been massively shaped by global forces in the last few centuries.
Absolutely. Think about food again. Italian food needs tomatoes, right?
Can't imagine it without pizza, pasta sauce.
Tomatoes are from Mexico. They only got to Italy after Columbus. Julius Caesar never ate a tomato.
Mind blown. What else?
Potatoes in Ireland and Poland. From the Andes, relatively recent arrivals. Indian food without chili peppers. Chilies are also from the Americas. Swiss chocolate. Cocoa is Mexican. Argentinian beef steaks. Cattle are European. Before Columbus, it was llama steaks.
So all these traditional national dishes are actually products of global exchange.
Almost entirely. It shows how interconnected and changed everything is. Dante never had pasta with tomato sauce. William Tell never had chocolate. Buddha never tasted chili.
Okay, another example. Challenging a romantic image.
The Plains Indians of North America. The image is the noble warrior on horseback, defending ancient traditions.
Totally. Iconic.
But horses only arrived with the Europeans. Native Americans on the plains only adopted horses widely in the 17th, 18th centuries. It completely revolutionized their society's hunting, warfare, politics.
So that classic Plains Indian horse culture was actually new, a modern adaptation.
Relatively speaking, yes. It was a dynamic, modern culture that emerged because of global forces, the arrival of the horse, not in spite of them. It wasn't some timeless tradition stretching back millennia.
Okay, so the practical merging of the world happened relatively recently. But the idea of global unity, that's older.
Much older.
Yeah.
The groundwork was laid way back in the first millennium BC.
Because our basic instinct is tribal, right? Us versus them.
Seems to be. It's common in social animals. Chimps don't care about chimps in the next valley. Lions don't aim to unite all lions. It's about your immediate group.
But humans, with the cognitive revolution, started cooperating with strangers based on shared myths, shared identities.
Exactly. Imagined communities. But even early ones, like ancient Egypt, had limits. Egyptians were us. Everyone else. Barbarians. Them.
So still an us and a them, just maybe a bigger us.
Right. The truly revolutionary shift in the first millennium BC was the emergence of ideas that were potentially universal. Ideas that could, in theory, encompass all of humanity. No more them. Everyone could be us.
And what were these universal orders?
Three main types emerged. First, the economic order money. The idea that the whole world is one potential market and everyone is a potential customer. Value is universal.
Okay, money. What else?
Second, the political order empire. The idea that there could or should be one single empire ruling the entire world and everyone is a potential subject. Think Alexander the Great, Rome, China's all under heaven.
One market, one empire, and the third.
Third, universal religions. Buddhism, Christianity, Islam. The idea that there is one single truth, one divine law that applies to everyone, and all humans are potential believers.
So merchants, conquerors, and prophets.
They were the first people in history, really, to think beyond the local us versus them and imagine systems that could include every single human on the planet.
That's a massive shift in perspective.
Huge. And these three ideas, universal money, universal empire, universal truth, have been spreading and competing and sometimes merging ever since, laying the foundation for the interconnected world we have now.
Which brings up that final intriguing point. Why did money sometimes succeed where gods and kings failed?
It's that adaptability, maybe. Money doesn't demand you believe in a specific god or swear fealty to a distant emperor. It just requires you believe that other people believe in the money.
Like the Osama bin Laden example, hated America, hated its values, but perfectly happy to use US dollars.
Exactly. Money speaks a language almost everyone can understand, regardless of their other beliefs. It's incredibly tolerant in its own way, a fascinating paradox.
Okay, let's wrap this up. So key takeaways. Cultures aren't static, they're dynamic, often driven by internal contradictions.
Right. And history, viewed from afar, shows a strong trend towards unity, merging separate worlds into one global system.
And these universal concepts, money, empire, religion, were crucial ideological tools in making that happen.
That's the core of it. Hopefully that gives everyone a framework for thinking about these big historical sweeps.
And maybe puts today's events, global interactions, even our own sense of cultural identity into a new light.
That's the aim. See the long-term currents beneath the daily waves. Did it spark any new questions for you?
Definitely. Which leads to that final thought for everyone listening. If we're heading towards this unified global culture and authentic, distinct cultures are fading, what happens next?
Yeah, what are the new contradictions? What tensions will drive change in a single interconnected world that still holds wildly diverse values?
What's the next engine of change going to be? Something to definitely mull over.
Absolutely. And just to confirm, we have gone through the key ideas, the timelines, the arguments, the examples like medieval contradictions, modern politics, Tasmania, the Great Swallowing, ethnic food origins, Plains Indians, and the rise of universal orders, money, empire, religion, covering the main points and theses from the material regarding these sociocultural shifts and their implications.
Great. A lot to think about there.